When Columbus landed here, we had no major illness. We lived a long time, and we were healthy. We believe in our native belief that the older you get, of course, the healthier you get, because you know more about healing. You know more about the light of yourself. You know more about the teas to drink to keep you healthy. So the older you get, the healthier you get. My grandmother, who's between 90 and 100, just got married for the 4th time. And if she lives a few more years, 10 or 20 more years, she'll be as old as her mother was. We used to live a long time, and when we were old, we were healthy. Our most dangerous year was our first year of life, and after that, we got healthier. And we had no major illness. Today, we have many. One of the illnesses we have is alcohol and drug abuse. In Vernon, they just sent me a letter. I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old daughter in 1st and 2nd grade in the Vernon school system. I just got a letter from the Vernon school system telling me as a parent that I should teach my children about drugs because there's a drug problem in 5th grade. The letter said, you know, they found out that 7th graders are selling drugs to 5th graders. And our elders have shared with us that the illness goes where it is needed. The illness goes where the teaching is needed. And there's a reason why these illnesses are in our classrooms. Because that is a place, I believe, that much of the illness in our society is coming from. And I have great respect for teachers, but I see a lot of teachers who might be great teachers almost handcuffed by a system that is systematically creating and producing unhealthy people. We believe every illness is 4 things. First, we believe it is a teaching. Every illness comes to teach us a lesson. You don't have to learn the lesson of the illness to get well, but if you don't learn the lesson, it may come to you again, or a more serious one. So we find ourselves today going to the doctor. He does a few tests. He gives us a bottle of pills. There's a word on there so long you can't even read it. Just below that it says take 3 a day for 2 weeks. So you take 3 a day for 2 weeks and you get well, but what did you learn? Our elders call that incomplete healing. If you get healed like that, the illness will come to you again. So we believe every illness is a teaching. Secondly, every illness within that teaching has a precise, clear, exact message about our life and our journey and what we are supposed to learn as unique individual beings in our life's path through this world. The third thing we believe is every illness is a blessing. And the fourth thing we believe is every illness attempts to return us to balance. So if you have an illness, you ask yourself, is there something that's out of balance in our life? We have illness in our classroom. Is there something that's out of balance in our classroom? My great uncle was blessed by an illness called leukemia. He was blessed with cancer. He had it for 5 years, and as he had it, he got weaker. He was a big man at one time, but towards the end, he was a small man. And when he was a small man and no longer could walk, I was on my way to the airport to go give a talk like this one. And I thought I'd stop in the hospital to see him. He said, "Nephew, I told the nurse early this morning you were coming. I got a pass to get out of the hospital today. I want you to take me up to my lodge. I'm doing my ceremony." I says, "Uncle, I don't think you can walk. Can you? I mean, how are you going to do this?" He said, "That's why I'm glad you came." He said, "You're going to carry me. I want you to carry me up the mountain. I want you to carry me through my ceremony." I said, "Look, I got a plane ticket. If I don't go make this keynote address, these people are going to think I'm a real loser. I'm supposed to be in Whitehorse tomorrow morning." He said, "Nephew, today is the day. We do it today, or it will never be done. Today's the day we must do this." So I carried him up the mountain. I carried him in his lodge 4 times, and I carried him to the creek 4 times and helped him wash, and he did his ceremony, and I was wondering if he'd do it differently. But he didn't do it differently. But on the 3rd round, he said, "Nephew," he said, "look at me. Take a close look." When the door was open after the 3rd round was over, he said, "Take a close look at my body. I want you to look at me." And when I looked at him, he said, "I don't look very good, do I?" He said, "This is just my body." He said, "I've learned why cancer has come to the human beings. You know, it's a good illness. It gives us a lot of time to think. It gives us a lot of time to balance." And I think he would feel good about me sharing with you what he shared with me that day. He said, you know, when I went to that residential school, I was abused. And I brought that abuse home to the reserve here. And I was an abuser of many women on this reserve. And when I've had this cancer, I went and I begged every one of them for forgiveness. He said some of them shook my hand. We had tears together. And some of them had angry words. But maybe those angry words is what was needed. He said, if you ever get an illness like this, the first thing to do is to be grateful, because this illness is the great blessing and balancing of my life. He said, I'm grateful to have this illness. He said, cancer, he said, that's a good one. It gives us lots of time to balance. I see why the Creator has given it to the human beings now, because the human beings need a lot of time to do a lot of balancing work. I used to know and traveled a little bit with an elder whose name was Lame Deer. You might have heard of him. He wrote a book called Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions. When he gave his talks, he used to say, you know, in our schools, we go to school for how many ever years you go, 12 or more years. For 12 years, they teach this. But never one day on this. At the end of 12 years, he said, we're like a flat tire. We go plop, plop, plop through life. It's a pretty rough ride. He said, our communities and our tribal politics, he said, it's like a car with four flat tires. It's a pretty rough ride. Lame Deer once said, they put us in many square boxes. And in these square boxes, they attempted to make us powerless. In the United States Congressional Record in 1789, the United States Congress wrote a statement that they would make schools, and with these schools, they would educate Native people out of existence. There's no doubt that education has been a weapon that's been used against us. There's no doubt that there was every attempt to render us powerless in these classrooms. When my uncle gave me the permission to do a sweat house like he did it, he said this to me. He said, nephew, he said, today I give you the permission to do this. And when you decide to do it, he said, the first time you do it, you fast for 4 days to build your lodge. You notice in your lifetime, some guys, they build their lodge, but they don't fast, and pretty soon they've forgotten it. He said, this is not good. He said, you take care of it, and it takes care of you. He said, but when you're doing your first lodge, he said, you go really slow, take a lot of time. You can do it just like I've done it. You can do everything just as I've taught you. But you're going to come to a certain place when you're going to want to do it a little differently. He said, do it that way. And he said these words to me exactly. He said, our powerfulness arises from our uniqueness. He said, if you copy me exactly, each time you do your ceremony, you become weaker, and I'll become weaker also. And you know, when I went to school, that's what they told me. They said, do it this way. And if you didn't do it that way, you were wrong. No, do it this way, over and over, this way. There's only one way to do it, this way. You got to do it this way. And as years go by, I'm being told there's only the one way. The uniqueness of our being, where our powerfulness at the center of the universe lies, gets crushed. And how many of us, when I graduated after 8 years of college, did I feel powerful and great at the center of the universe? Man, I was burnt out beyond belief. My college experience was the most unhealthy experience I ever had in my life. An elder from South Dakota shared with me a couple years ago. He said, you know, in a Native educational system, a young man or a young woman could do one of two things. They could either succeed or they could succeed. He said, we didn't design failure for our children. Today we spend great amounts of money and we send our children to schools where failure is waiting for them. Failure is a designed part of the process. We design failure for our young people. It's unbelievable if you think of it. We had an educational system in this continent that when Columbus landed here, we had developed 8 out of 10 foods that people eat today. At the banquet tonight, most of what you're going to eat, those seeds come from us. The seeds of those foods, we developed them. When Columbus landed here, we had the only existing democracies on earth at that time. We had the largest pyramids on earth. We had a circular mass system with the concept of zero at the center. We had the largest physical buildings on earth, the pueblos in the southwest. We had great math, great art, great philosophy. We had everything. We had this from our educational system that produced people who could either succeed or they could succeed. We did not design failure for ourselves. Who would design failure for themselves? Who would send people to an institution, send the children from their village to an institution where they know that a certain percentage of that village is going to be marked a failure? As years go by, they're going to come out believing that there's something not quite good enough about them. When I was a young man, the elders told me to watch for two events in the heavens, events that all the world would see, events that would mark the beginning and the end of our healing time as Native people. They said the beginning of the healing time would begin when the eagle flies its highest in the night. Some elders said when the eagle circles the moon and returns. Some elders said, watch the heavens, because when the eagle lands up on the moon, the first light of a new day will come to Native people. And to the four winds and to the four directions, nothing will be strong before us. And anything we wish to do, we may do. And so when that eagle landed on the moon in 1969, they sent back the first words, the eagle has landed. I met with other young men and women who had heard these same things from these same elders. And the elders said that we've been put in so many square boxes, meaning schools, that we might have even forgotten our healing circle. And they said when the Indians come back to heal, they will have been put in so many square boxes and made to set in rows that they will have forgotten the circle. But it won't be long before the circle is remembered. But he said when the people remember the circle, they may not even know their healing ceremony, but all they have to do is set in a circle and the healing power will start to go around. So I met with other young men and women who had heard these same words, and I says, have you seen the circle yet? Do you know where it's happening? I've been looking for it. I don't see it happening. Back in 1969, we began to see two places where the people were healing, where the Native people were making the circle and beginning the healing process. The first place that I believe the healing began was in the prisons, was in the prison systems, that the healing circles were first formed, in the general Native population. And the second place was the treatment centers. When we built our first treatment center in Washington State, and when we built Round Lake Treatment Center in British Columbia, the elders came to us and said, don't forget the circle. It's time now to use it. The people are going to start to set in the circle. And they said the healing time would last until the second event in the heavens would happen. The elders told us to beware because the human beings will make a house and throw the house in the sky. And the elders said, when you see the human beings living in the sky on a permanent basis, what we call now the space platform, by then, our healing, whatever is going to happen that is healing for us, has happened. When the house is in the sky, the other relatives upon the earth, around the earth in different places, are going to begin to invite those of us who have been in the healing circles to start circles for them. I was once in a sweat house with a man who was 92 years old, was running it. When the sweat house was over, and this was back in the 60s before the Freedom of Indian Religion Act was passed in the United States, when ceremonies and the things like we just did here this morning were punishable by 10 years in prison. If you had a staff like this in your house, was a $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison. Section A of the law said it's against the law for any Indian to sing any Indian song or dance any Indian dance or perform any Indian ceremony. Section B said it's against the law for any Indian over the age of 50 to teach any Indian under the age of 50 any Indian song, dance, or ceremony. Section C said this shall be punishable by 10 years in prison and or a $10,000 fine. So we were way out in the woods having this ceremony in hiding. The elders usually had guards to the four directions. They probably really at that time there was no worry, but the people had a certain amount of fear from what they had been through. And when it was just this elder and myself in the sweat house, I asked him if I could ask a question. He said yes. I said, before Columbus, did we have these four flags in here to represent the four races? Did we know there was four colors of people? He said, oh yes, we knew that. He said, didn't you ever notice that when you pray for people, they show up? He said, you go into town here, you might see a yellow man or a yellow woman, those people are the answer to our prayers. We've had this flag in here for them for thousands of years. We prayed a long time for them. Now they're here. He said, you go into town, you might see a black man or a black woman. He said, we've been praying for them a long time. Now they're here. He said, you go into town, you notice, in the United States anyway, for every one Indian, there's over 200 white people. He said, when you see this, it shows you the strength of our prayers. We were few, but we attracted many. He said, if you go to Europe, they had this lodge at one time, but they lost it. He said, if you go to Africa, you won't find it. They had it at one time, but they lost it. If you go to Asia and look for this lodge with the 4 flags in it, you won't find the flags there. He said, that's why it can only happen here. We held on. That's why everybody came here. He said, when Columbus landed here, of the 4 peoples, we were the full cup. We had everything. But in this last 500 years, our cup has been emptied. That's why when the house is in the sky, it says in our teachings that the gourd of ashes will come here, the atomic bomb. And after the atomic bomb has come here, then there'll be an attempt to make peace on earth, and the native people will be invited to that circle. And that's why our cup has been emptied. But a little bit was left in the bottom. And that little bit that's left in the bottom, that's a little bit of our culture that we still have carried on and held on to, despite the law of the United States and Canada, and despite the force of these countries to wipe our culture out. The elders say the Creator has made it to be that there was a little left in the cup. And it's that little bit that's left in our cup that we'll use to help bring peace on earth. After the gourd of ashes, the atomic bomb comes here. And after we're invited to the circle, the elders say our yellow, black, and white brothers will invite us to the circle, and we're to sit on the eastern side, because they said the people will face the east, and they will say, how is it that we can live together in peace upon the earth? And I was real happy during this, just before the Iraq war, the elders in South Dakota gathered together some money, and they're not wealthy people. And they sent a pipe keeper to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia and to Iraq, to do a pipe ceremony, to bring peace. And one of my students in my classes said, it didn't work, did it? I mean, there was a war. I said, maybe it didn't stop the war, but it introduced a positive force. It's better to introduce positive forces into the universe than negative ones. That ceremony that was done there, that will always be. And maybe it would have been worse. Anyway, it was very moving to me to know that the people cared enough about what was going to happen over there, to send a pipe keeper over there from South Dakota to do a ceremony and pray for peace, so that those people, in our teachings, we call it cushioning. The hard time they're going to have might be cushioned. It might be a little less severe. So what does it take to make the classroom a healing place? I'm going to share with you 5 things that I believe are absolutely critical to make the classroom a healing place. The first one is that we need a curriculum that teaches us the teachings of our physical body. We need a curriculum that makes us feel good about our physical self. We need a curriculum of body awareness. When my wife had her first moon or menstrual cycle, she was taken to the lake by her grandmothers, gently beaten with red willow, and taught the teachings of a woman's body, the meaning of it. And the man that I got my master's degree from, Dr. Daniel Jordan, used to say, and I really believe this strongly, meaning brings health. Meaning brings health. And when your body has meaning, it brings health. We have teachings for each of these 10 fingers. We have teachings for each of our toes. We have teachings about our legs, our stomach, each of our organs and our lungs and our voice and our hearing and our seeing. And every part of our body has a teaching to it. And if you know these teachings, then your body will have meaning. And the illnesses that you get will also have more meaning, because wherever they affect your body, there's a teaching that is being called upon. I'm one of the people, I think my wife to some extent too, we went to school systems that taught us not to feel very good about our bodies. We came out of school sort of embarrassed about ourselves. The first couple of years my wife and I were married, we didn't even undress in front of each other because we were embarrassed about our physical bodies. The school system had taught us that our bodies were not good. They're the source of evil desires. You know, we don't believe this in our native way. We believe that without these desires, you know, none of us would be here. So these desires are very sacred because they bring forth life. But like all sacred things, they must be treated with respect and dignity to bring health. Because any sacred thing, when it's abused, will bring you an illness to remind you of its sacredness. This water is a very sacred and healing thing. But I could change this water into alcohol and use it for physical pleasure. If you use something sacred for physical pleasure, it will bring an illness to remind you of its sacredness. Of all the plants that we have and of all the plants that we use for healing at Round Lake Treatment Center, we believe, and the elders have shared with us, that the chief healer of all plants is tobacco. We use tobacco for healing. It's a very sacred plant. But if you use it just for physical pleasure without any prayer or ceremony, it will bring an illness to remind you that it's a sacred plant that must be respected. Our sexuality in our communities has become very strange. So strange that when I tell people I knew elders that even had a ceremony for that, sometimes people don't believe it. If you smelled the cedar coming out of the bedroom and heard the songs, you knew that something was happening that night. A ceremony was being made. That was a ceremony that had to do with sexuality. That's something that brings forth all life on the earth. It's a very sacred thing. If you misuse that sexuality, you will get an illness to teach you that it's a sacred thing. And if you cure that illness without understanding that teaching, another illness will be given to you. So we had gonorrhea and syphilis. We cured those. Now we have AIDS and herpes. The non-Indian society, they believe in fighting AIDS. But in our society, we believe in working with it to understand the teaching. What is this illness trying to teach us about our conduct? What have all the great spiritual teachers we had in North America said about how we're supposed to conduct ourselves as men and women with regard to each other? So we need a curriculum, a body awareness. One elder I knew, if you don't mind me sharing this story, when he was down to his last day of life, he called me to his house. He said, "Would you shave my face?" He just had a few hairs, but they had grown way out. And he had the old brush. So I lathered up his face, shaved his face. He said, "You know, if it's not too much to ask, could you get a pan of water and I want to wash myself?" So he washed himself. He said, "That's my best clothes I have. Not too good, but it's the best I have. Help me get those on." So he got those on. About 2 hours later, he went to sleep and changed worlds. He respected his physical being that had carried him through life. He knew the teachings of the body and the sacredness of the body. We need a curriculum that teaches us to have respect for our physical being, especially with regard to what we eat, what we drink. One of the traditional healers I know in Washington says that this is the main organ of our health. What we put in here and what comes out of here affects our health more than any of our other organs. He said half the people I heal would not be ill if they just drink a little pure water every day. That means water with no chloride or no fluoride. That means mountain water or distilled water. He said half the people I heal would not be sick if they had just drinking a little clear water each day. We need a curriculum that teaches us to have respect for this physical being, not to hit each other. The school that my children go to in Vernon is like a battlefield. Every day they came home with stories with so-and-so hit so-and-so, and so-and-so did this, and so-and-so pushed somebody down. And this is not really our way. This is not respect for each other. It may be like this to such an extent now that everybody thinks, well, that's natural. You know, kids do that. But I don't think it was always like that. We need a curriculum of, the second thing we need is a curriculum that develops our mental self, our mental competencies. I think that most of our curriculums do that pretty well, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Although I do think we could take a look at some of the processes of thinking. We assume in our curriculums that every child thinks the same, but some people have more thinking skills than others, and thinking as a skill, you know, could be taught. The third part of the curriculum that we need that we don't have now in many schools is a curriculum that moves us towards spiritual competency. By spiritual competency, I mean the ability to interact with the unknown. And part of the unknown is that unknown part of yourself that you have not been yet. When you're in first grade, looking ahead at your life, you don't know really what's going to happen. That's an unknown. It takes spiritual competency to interact with that unknown. And the symbol system that we use to interact with the unknown is a symbol system of art. And in Round Lake, we became aware that one of the things that signifies a healthy human being is that healthy human beings are naturally creative. A healthy human being is doing some form of art. Painting, singing, dancing, beading, writing, pottery, something. If a human being is doing no art, in our definition of health, they are not well. Their life has been stopped. The energy that flows in their being must not be moving right. The energy along this red road from the mind to the heart has been stopped somewhere. Because if it wasn't stopped, they would naturally create. And if you ever visit Round Lake Treatment Center, you will see all kinds of art around the center. All that has been made by clients. It is made by clients who during their healing process all of a sudden started drawing again, or all of a sudden started painting again, or all of a sudden started carving again. When that client comes and says, "Do you have a piece of cedar I could use to carve?" then we know that they are healing somewhere, because that creativity is reawakening within them. And when you go into a village and you look at how many people in that village are creative, what percent of the village is practicing some art form? In many villages, it's less than 10%. And that is a gauge of our health. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the spiritual competency. When I met my wife at the residential school in Kamloops, and it looked like we were going to get married, I took her to an elder. We went to an elder. He's one of these elders, and you probably have them around here. He can see the children a woman's going to have walking behind her. These are beings waiting to have life. And I was told by the doctors I would never be able to have children. So we went and had tea with this elder. We asked him if maybe we could get married. He said, "It's possible for you two to grow old together if you choose." I said, "Well, would it be possible to have children?" He said, "Yes. Would you like to know about them?" "Yes, please tell us." He said, "Your first child is not coming to live on this world for long. He's just coming to make a contact with you and your wife and your family." He said, "You talk in front of groups." And he said, "That first child is coming just to be the protector of the children that will come later. Just to be your family's protector." He said, "Then you will have 2 girls. And then you'll have a son. And then maybe 1 or 2 more." And so we lost our first daughter. And now we've had 2 more daughters. And after we lost our first daughter, my wife became very upset with the hospital system. She said, "The next time I have a child, I'm having a child the way the Native people used to have children." So when she got pregnant, she said, "Remember I said I want to have a child in a Native way?" I said, "Well, we wouldn't know how to do that." She said, "Well, we will go and find out." And the elder told us that day, he said, "The daughter comes to teach the father." He said, "When you have a daughter, you submit yourself to her as a teacher." He said, "The son comes to teach the mother." And since I've only had daughters, I figure I must need a lot of help. Or the Creator's really blessing me or something. So my wife went to these elders. They said, "Well, there's a couple ways you could have your child. That you could have it, one of the ways we used to have children, the woman went off by herself to have the child. We always had children standing up. The elder said the most painful way for a woman to have a child is laying on her back." So my wife had her child on all fours. They said there's another way where a woman goes off with a midwife or a helper. They said there's another way, we call it a ceremonial birth. They said you could do that because in your family you have the pipe. You deliver the child by using a pipe. My wife chose this way, which meant that I had to deliver the children. So when my wife got pregnant, I went to my ancestors and I said, "Grandfathers, please allow me to feel half of what my wife feels. Please allow me to be pregnant with her. I want to go through this pregnancy. If we're going to do it this way, I want to be pregnant with her." This is a hard concept to express in English. But my ancestors, being very generous, they gave it all to me. I had all the morning sickness. At night I was going out for ice cream and 7-Up. I gained 60 pounds and my wife was pregnant. She only gained about 40. So one night my wife and I were going to sleep. She says, "I think tomorrow morning is the time." I said, "Yeah, I think so." So the next morning we woke up in labor. I was really dizzy. I was trying to get control of myself, boil water or something. So I had this tea that the elders told us to wash our child in, this sage tea. The first time they said the child is washed in sage tea after birth, they won't have any problems with water. And so when my wife went into labor, the pipe was loaded. She was laying on the floor, her head to the east. We began to call people, elders and people who wanted to be part of this ceremony, and they began to come and sit in a circle around her. And this labor, her time in labor, was a ceremony. And as the day went by, towards sunset, I began to feel that the child was about to be born, so I took my hand drum and I sang 4 songs. And I noticed one thing. The elders had said, the coming of a child is like the coming of a new pipe, and we are all that sacred pipe. And when we met with the elder in Washington State that day, he said, and one woman one time, I don't like to offend anybody when I talk, but one woman took offense at this. But the elder said, when you make the child, he said, you're not alone. He said, the ancestors gather around. He said, if you ever make a child, you look up in your room, you see lots of little lights in your room, you don't need a pregnancy test. The ancestors have come close. One has been sent forth. He said it takes 9 ancestors to agree, from the father and or the mother, to bring a child. He said when you're making the body, he said at that moment, the ancestors meet in a circle on the spiritual side and make the light. And at the moment that body is sent forth through your physical conduct, the ancestors send forth the light through their spiritual conduct. And he said no one is sent to this world with nothing. Everyone is sent with something. And that something we call the gift. And that curriculum that we need in our schools that would move us towards spiritual competency would be a curriculum that would help us move with the uniqueness of our being towards our gift. Moving towards our gift does 3 things that give us health. It gives our life purpose. One time an elder took me to a mall in Tacoma, Washington. He said, I want you to feel the people as they're going by. I was sitting there real hard trying to feel the people. He said, what do you feel after a couple hours? I said, nothing. He said, that's good. He said, we're the only ones here. It's kind of lonely, isn't it? And I wondered what he meant because, hundreds of people were going by. Later on, I realized what he meant is these people are looking for their gift, but all they have is pieces of paper. So these pieces of paper are very important to them. They have a book that tells them exactly how many they have. They have special buildings where it's stacked in stacks, and they keep track and count it just the exact amount because that's what they have. They don't have the song. They don't have the dance. They don't have the ceremony to find out what's in that gift. Those pieces of papers are all right. I hope you all have a lot. But you can't buy your gift. You only find your gift. And we're really lucky. There was a non-Indian social worker in the Vernon Reserve, and he told me one day outside the band office, boy, alcohol is really devastating the native culture. But what the Swiss elders told me in Switzerland was that alcohol had devastated the culture of Europe. I believe, and like a lot of elders believe, that the Swiss are the keepers of the traditions of Europe, in the same way that the Tibetans are the keepers of the traditions, the original teachings of Asia. And the Swiss elders told me alcohol devastated our culture. We are lucky that we have some of our culture left and we can use it to find that gift. And our relatives are going to be coming and asking us how they can find their gift, and we should help them. It's a sad thing, every 3 years you live 1,000 days. Every 10 years you live about 3,000 days. If you're my age, you've had almost 15,000 days of life. What a sad thing if a person was to live those 15,000 days and not take a few days to find their gift. When my daughter was born, I noticed her head came out 3 times, and then like the coming of a pipe, the 4th time her head came out. And I said to her what the elders had told me to say, we welcome you to our family. We realize that you are a child of the Great Spirit, creator of all good things. And we are honored that we have been asked to be your guardian upon this earth. We will be the best guardian to you that we can be. And before I cut her cord or anything, I placed her on her mother and I put our 3 hearts in line to make that connection. But the whole circle looked up and everybody seen the dancing little blue light. And I said, I know this is not you. I know this is you. Again, I welcome you to our family. I'm glad that you have came. We will try to respect whatever gift you are bringing. And in our teachings, we believe the gift makes an appearance by age 5, sometimes just for a moment. But if a parent is watching the children carefully, they might see the gift and then encourage it. If it's unseen, sometimes it goes back down and it's 10, 20, 30 years again before it comes back. But for it to come back and help the person out, they need training to get ready for their gift. I was once told that when a child is really gifted, but they don't get the training to deal with their gift, the kind of cultural training we had at one time, the discipline to become a person. When they don't get that training in the natural cultural way, they get it sometimes through a hard time. Sometimes when a person is really gifted, they end up in prison, or they end up severe alcoholic, or they end up with a severe illness, or they end up with a really hard life situation. And that's the way they get the training. As Uncle Pete used to say, they could have got it easy, but instead they get it hard. Because we don't give them that training. That would be what a curriculum of spiritual competency would do in the school system. Would give the person the training. And I believe that art should be at the center of the curriculum, because art is the symbol system that we use to interact with the unknown part of ourselves. I'd like to take a moment to talk about 2 other symbol systems that we use. We use the symbol system of language. In this conference here, for the most part, we are speaking English. The symbol system of language is the symbol system we use to interact with other human beings. When our expertise at using 1 or more languages goes down, we lose our competency with regard to the human environment. When people speak a lot of languages, they tend to be competent with regard to the human environment. And what people are competent about, they tend to take care of. What people feel an incompetency about, they tend to destroy. They said on TV that 1 out of 3 people graduating from American high schools in big cities cannot read and write well enough to be functionally literate. And at the same time, the violence is increasing. If I go to a village and they tell me, well, we have gangs and the people are fighting. You know, the kids are fighting each other now and they're doing this and they're doing that. I know the language skills has went down. I know that maybe their parents speak a different language than they do. Or maybe the parents and grandparents speak 3 or 4 languages and now their children can hardly speak 1. In Alberta, they passed a law a couple years ago saying everyone that graduates from high school wants to go to college has to be tested in English, because at the end of 12 years we can't read and write, even 1 language. And I believe we should be reading and writing 3 or 4. You know, I don't know where it comes from, but when my children were about 3, one morning at breakfast, I decided to speak Spanish to them. And already they didn't like Spanish. I don't know where they got it. They were only 3 years old. They said, oh, Dad, we don't want to speak that. I said, why not? They said, we don't like it. I thought, well, where did they learn in 3 years to not like a language? So we told them, you know, every language is good. You can speak 4 or 5 languages. My uncle used to say, I speak 3 languages, Okanagan, Shuswap, and Indian. The 3rd symbol system we use is the symbol system of math. In North America, we had a mathematical system that was circular in nature. We had the concept of 0, as I mentioned earlier, at the center of our mathematical system. We had a mathematical system that produced a calendar that lost 1 day every 600 years. I believe if you go to the southern part of Saskatchewan, Alberta, you'll see circles of rocks, which were part of that calendar that lost 1 day every 600 years. The calendar we use now loses 1 day every 4. We had a calendar that measured the movement of the planet Venus, the movement of the sun, and the movement of the moon all at the same time in a binary relationship. We had a binary positive-negative flow calendar. We were good mathematicians. Sometimes I hear elders say, oh, that's math. And math is a symbol system we use to interact with the physical world. When Columbus came here, we had a great mathematical understanding, and every river was clean. The sky was clean. There was no endangered species. Everything was well taken care of. If you're an environmentalist and you want to save the environment, teach math. You will notice that when your children are young, they will come to you with mathematical questions. Daddy, 2 and 2 is 4, isn't it? That's right, my girl, and math is really important. You study that. Anytime you have a mathematical question, you come ask Daddy. That math is really important. And when my children learned about environment in the first grade, they're really into it now. I told them, if you want to learn about the environment, study math. Because children naturally are interested in math. Sometimes kids come to their parents and they say, Daddy, is 2 and 2 4? The parent says, oh, that's math. I've even heard people say, oh, Indians aren't good at math. But this is simply not true. The same with English. I've heard some people say, oh, English isn't a good language. No, you can't say anything in English. I know what people are saying. But if we're using English, and if it is a symbol system that we're going to interact with the human environment, and I strongly believe that everyone should speak their own language. I strongly believe everybody should speak 3 or 4 languages. But if we're going to use English, we should study it well. Learn it deeply. In the same way at the end of our ceremonies, where we used to take a single word, and the elders might speak on that one word for 45 minutes to an hour. And great respect for words. We should have great respect for English if we're going to use it to interact with the human environment. We should learn it deeply. I hope if we learn it deeply, it'll give us more of an opportunity also to learn our own language more deeply. When you take a person's language away from them, you've cut their identity to the bone. You've destroyed the entire foundation for life. I've seen amazing things happen in native-controlled schools where the children just learned a little bit of their own language, as is happening now in Vernon. So those 3 symbol systems, art, language, and math, we use them all together to interact with our inner self. We use those all 3 together to determine how we use our energies, what our values are. Our understanding of these 3 symbol systems have a great creative effect on what we do in our life on an everyday basis. So we need a curriculum of body awareness, a curriculum that develops mental competency, and a curriculum that develops spiritual competency. The 4th thing, and I think probably the most important, is we need a curriculum that develops emotional competency. If you've read Ann Wilson Schaef's book, The Addicted Society, When Society Becomes an Addict, she makes a statement in there that the United States and Canada function like addicts. Canada functions like an alcoholic. An alcoholic spends more than they make. An alcoholic doesn't tell people how much they're spending. An alcoholic does things secretly. An alcoholic blames their problems on someone else. The last speech that President Reagan gave as President of the United States, he made the statement that the drug problem in the United States is a communist plot. Reminds me when in my drinking days, I was walking through a park and I seen one of my buddies, his name was Henry. I said, hey Henry, and Henry was so drunk that he could no longer stand up. He was on the ground, sort of leaned up against a tree. I said, Henry, have you seen Dave? He said, Dave, hey, now there's a guy with a drinking problem. Because an alcoholic is always looking for someone worse than themselves. Someone they can give foreign aid to. Someone they can look down on. Someone they can blame their problems on. And when I sobered up and I joined Alcoholics Anonymous, and an old timer in Alcoholics Anonymous told me, he says, if you start drinking when you're 5 and you're sobering up now when you're 26, he said, you're still 5. And in my alcoholic thinking at that time, I thought, well, I can't actually tell you what I thought, but it wasn't very nice. But he was right. And if my family has been suffering from alcoholism for a number of generations, and if our villages have been suffering from alcoholism for a number of generations, how emotionally mature are we? You can tell an emotional maturity of a society, but how well they conduct their marriage. Incidentally, the elder said when the time of healing comes to the native people, the main ceremony of healing is marriage. When the people again begin to respect marriage and hang in there, the healing comes. Whatever the sickness is that we have and the hurt within us, we bring into the marriage, and the marriage will heal it if we have the strength to stay in there. They said on TV last night that the number of divorces applied for in California has now surpassed the number of marriage licenses. So more people are getting divorced than are getting married. This tells me that the people in California are not very emotionally mature. They're not very spiritually mature. We used to get married young, and we used to stay married. I was doing a workshop on a reserve in Saskatchewan, and there was 2 elders. They'd been married 70 years. They got married when they were 14, and they were both 84. They were having a party for him, and I went up to the guy, the old timer, and I says, "You know what they say about marriage?" He says, "What's that?" I said, "Well, the first 70 years are the hardest." Because when I got married, they said, the first year is the hardest. They said the first 7 years are the hardest, and the first 10 years are the hardest. In a curriculum of emotional competency, we need two things. One, we need a curriculum that's emotional healing. I've taught a couple of native controlled school systems in introducing counseling concepts in first grade with the hope that by 12th grade, we would be graduating expert counselors. Because we have a lot of sexual abuse, we have a lot of physical abuse. A lot of times people don't want to call in the authorities. How do we heal this? Let's make ourselves counselors. We need a curriculum that is healing to the emotions, that heals us of the hurt that we're carrying. At Round Lake, sometimes we get clients, 30 years earlier, they've been physically abused. They begin to work on getting that hurt out. Maybe one day they really go through a strong counseling session and ceremonial process to get that hurt out. It starts coming out. The next day, they're bruised from head to foot. They can hardly move. Those bruises that happened 30 years earlier, they're now coming to the surface. They've been in there all that time. Sometimes I'm counseling people. I know I'm not counseling them. I'm counseling their grandparent. Our grandparents were not allowed to heal. The native and many times the non-native ways of healing in some areas were not available to them. So now we get to heal for them. It's a great honor to heal for them. It's a real blessing to live in this time of healing and be able to heal for our last 7 generations. We need a curriculum that helps this. The second part of the curriculum we need is a curriculum that develops emotional competency. The first part of that in the first few grades would be a curriculum that would help the child to begin to identify their emotions. What is it that you're feeling? I was counseling a man the other day who was 45 years old. He said, "You know, I don't know if what I'm feeling." Because we are not trained in the emotional self. We're given 12 years on this and not 1 day on this. When I was a child, going to school from alcoholic home, some mornings it was pretty rough going to school. Some mornings when I got to school, I was shaking from fear. The teacher would say, "Go down to the nurse's room, get control of yourself." I went to school in bad shape for 12 years and never got 1 day of emotional healing. I had to pack all that stuff within myself. When I graduated from high school, I was emotionally crippled. An emotionally well person would organize, I believe, would organize their positive emotions around hope and their negative emotions around fear, such that you'd feel a sense of hope when you come in contact with something good for you. And you'd feel a sense of fear when you come in contact with something bad for you. But I was just the opposite. When I went to college, where I should have felt hope, gee, that first day in a college classroom, I almost passed out. I just knew I couldn't make it. You know, I knew I was too dumb. If people back home knew I was here, they'd be laughing at me. You know, I literally almost passed out. But when I went into the bars, where I should have felt fear, hey, I made it. Budweiser, I'm finally here. I knew I'd make it someday. All right, I'm in here drinking with the guys. God, I felt great. I felt hope. I seen men lose their lives in those places. I seen men die only a few feet from me. I should have felt fear, but I felt hope. I was emotionally crippled. Yeah, when that guy in AA told me I was only 5, I was really mad, but now I realize my wife has 3 children. I'm the oldest. I figure I'm about 17 now. I've been sober 16 years, so I'm 21. My wife's 30, so I guess I married an older woman. Towards the senior years, the high school, that curriculum of emotional competence would get into being able to develop that emotional state to the point where we could do, as our elders say we should be able to do, we could choose our emotions as we choose our food. We could choose good emotions for ourselves. We could use our emotions in a good way to make our life good, to feel good about life, to get to that a positive emotional state. There's a story about a young man. He didn't believe this elder was a healer. So he made a tea from a root that grows under the ground. When you drink it, it'll burn your stomach out. He told his friend, he says, "I'm going to give this tea to this elder. I'm going to show that he's a phony. If he's really powerful, he'll know better than to drink this. And if he drinks it and dies, I've shown that he didn't have any real powers." So one morning he brought the tea with an offering and he gave it to the elder. The elder took the tea and drank it. In about 15 seconds, the young man's stomach started burning. The young man began to realize that he was the one that was going to be affected by that tea. So what could he do? He begged forgiveness. The elder had another tea already waiting for him. He said, "Here, drink this. This will save you." He said, "You think you've come to take my life, but you have come to be my student. You'll be living with me for a while." And he became his student. And people say this is a true story, but one of the symbolic lessons of this story is that you have negative emotions. It's your stomach it burns out. It's true the word emotion means to go out, and your emotions affect all those around you, but they affect you most. And when we have negative emotional states, because we have not learned how to have a positive emotional state, it lessens our life. Above all things, we need a curriculum that develops the emotional side of the human being. I personally believe we are mental and emotional people living in a physical and spiritual world. And to develop only half of ourselves is just that, only develop half of ourselves. And I believe that the curriculums in the schools, we should learn history, science, math, and everything, half through the mind and half through the heart. We should develop curriculums where we learn science, we learn history, we learn language through the heart. This can be done through a curriculum that learns through the emotional self. As a matter of fact, scientists are now breaking the emotional code, and they're finding that the way we do remember things is by the emotions at the time. The fifth aspect of a curriculum we need to really develop a strong human being, at the center of that medicine wheel, is a thing called the will. We need a curriculum that develops the will. One of my teachers I've had in my life, when he was a young man, wanted to learn. He went to the elders to learn. The elders said, "Oh, this is very good. We'll be glad to teach you. But first, we'll ask you to just do one thing. We want you to bathe each morning before sunrise. You submerge yourself 4 times, and then you clean yourself with fur balls. Do this for 7 years, and then we'll begin." So for 7 years, he was bathing every morning without missing one day under the ice. If you come to Round Lake Treatment Center now as a client, you'll be bathing in the lake. You don't have to, but it's an option. We use spiritual bathing as part of our healing way there. We bathe in the lake year-round. We go under the ice. We have a fence so that you don't go too far under. We have a fence made into the lake. You can swim a little bit under the ice. We use the water. I guarantee you that if you were to bathe in the lake every morning for 7 years, your will would be stronger. Everything we used to do, culturally and ceremonially, there was a part of it that developed the will. The capacity in the will are our processes of learning. The first one of which is the capacity to pay attention. I've had elders tell me at one time we could sit down and hold a thought for 4 days without thinking of anything else. But my Uncle Don said today, it's a rare person that can hold a thought for 5 breaths. You start thinking of something, and by the time you breathe 5 times, your mind will have wandered. That's the state our minds have become in. That's how weak our will is now. But we still have a will. And as long as it's there, it can be developed. The worst thing that can happen to a child is to be beaten so severely that the will is broken. It's something that's impossible to repair to the state it once was. It can be repaired, but it never is as whole as it once was before it's broken. The will is something that needs to be nurtured and developed with discipline. This is what we did through ceremony, through fasting, through bathing. We had lots of traditional ways, and we can also develop non-traditional ways where we develop the will. Through fasting from words, through declaring silence. One thing I want to do before my life is over is to make a pledge to stay silent for 1 year. When I was studying with my relatives, one of the things he used to do is have me fast from words for 1 day a week, to go a day without saying anything. This is great discipline. This creates discipline. If you ever come to Round Lake and you walk north of Round Lake, you see circles of rocks. In these circles of rocks, a man would become a man. When he reached the age to become a man, he'd be placed in that circle of rocks each morning. First thing, he'd bathe in the lake. Then he'd be given a teaching for the day. He might go off and do that teaching, but by sundown, he'd be back in that circle of rocks. For maybe as long as a year, he'd be in that circle. To the south of Round Lake, you also find circles of rocks where women became women. The same thing with them exactly. At the beginning of the day, they'd bathe, and then a teaching that they'd work on for that day, and they'd become a woman. They get a foundation for life, a foundation for being a person, being a husband or wife, being a mother or father, being a son or daughter. At Round Lake, we're trying to relearn these things. We made one little change in our sweat house, and in the men's sweat, we dedicate the second round to women, and the women's sweat, they dedicate it to men. And in the men's sweat, we talk about becoming men again. We'd like to be sons again, and grandsons, and fathers, and grandfathers. The prophecy of the child standing alone briefly is this, that we would be nations, and then we would be broken down to tribes. The tribes would be broken down, we'd find ourselves living in bands. After we live in bands for a while, some of the people would forget what part of the clan system they are, what clan they are. When people forget what clan they are, they begin to marry their brothers and sisters, meaning we'll marry within 5 cousins. And when people begin to marry their brothers and sisters, some of our children will leave us and be raised by someone else. And some of those children that are raised by someone else will make their way back to the people, and some will never come back. They said the children will stand alone for quite some time. And in my dream they said the time of the children standing alone is at an end. It's now the time for the children to begin reuniting the family, because in the prophecy it also says things would go back. We're now in that time when the children are healing the family. Blessed are the families that bring their very old, their very young, and their unborn children into the family circle. In many places where I travel, families are coming together to have family circles to heal as families now. We're in that time when the family is healing. And in my dream they said if it turns out good, eagles will come over the ceremony. And 12 eagles came all together for the ceremony. And my great-grandmother said each eagle represents 10 years of life. And so if my daughter did get that 120 years of life, she'd live to be about as old as my great-great-great-grandmother was. So maybe the old age will come back to us. The elder said that when the time of the child standing alone comes to an end, there's a phrase from that prophecy that says, you think it would be the very old that will renew the people, but it will be the very young. It will be the children who find the drum, and with this drum they'll begin to heal the people. And they said that after the eagle lands on the moon, there'll be children born among us who will ask us questions about our culture, that even that question will show they know more than we do, and we won't be able to answer their question. Because the Creator will begin sending to us those children that will bring us regeneration, rebirth, and the healing of the people. Whenever you walk by a newborn child, you're walking by someone that could express healing and help to you if you needed it. All newborn children have healing power. Anyone who abuses a young child, the healing power of that child goes against that person who abuses them. So with this, I just want to say, I admire no one on earth more than teachers. My grandmother used to say, the most important thing we do in life is the education of our own children. My grandmother used to say, the education of our children is more important than life itself, because life itself comes to an end. But what you learn, you take with you. There's nothing a parent does that's more important than teaching their children, what they have to teach them. And especially now, our children need our time. When we were young, our elders told us that time would speed up. The parents would not have time for children, and that children would not have time for grandparents. And the elders said the human beings upon the earth will walk faster and faster. And as the human beings walk faster and faster, the Indians should walk slower and slower. So on that day when the Gourd of Ashes comes here, and that day of what we call the purification of all things happens, we'll be at a peaceful standstill. The spirit of purification will see us in peaceful standstill and pass over us. This will be the passing over of that spirit of purification that will come across our land, here in North America. It will come here. And this is the time, if you want to know what to do in your community to help the people, the elders say, watch the children. Children will tell you everything you need to know about what the people need. The main thing they need right now is our time. The elders say anytime we spank a child, it's because we don't take the time to do the proper teaching and disciplining by our cultural way. Spanking is a shortcut. It's something we do when we don't have time. Our children need our time. They need a lot of time. And I've taken your time. So, well, I've taken your time. You haven't been with your children, so I should be walking my talk. Anyway, thank you for you really have been paying, I feel, good attention to me. Thank you for your respect and your kind attention. If I've said anything from my culture that's contrary to yours that might have been insulting, I ask your forgiveness now. Everything I said was in the spirit of unity and healing. If I said anything you can use, I'm saying it for you to use, and I'm giving it to you to use. My elders told me that what was given to me was given to be given, and now I'm giving it to you. If there's anything I said that you might be able to use, feel free to use it, because I'm interested in the healing of the people. I know we all heal together. One group doesn't heal and the other group stays behind. We're all going together, all my relations.